They say prevention is better than cure, and these drugs are here to prove that saying right. Thank heavens we weren't around when those were being sold in pharmacies, because the following medicines were actually making us sick. Here are some of the dangerous drugs that were actually marketed as medicine back in the day. Cocaine toothache drops. Believe it or not, there was a time when things were quite different than they are today. Back in the late 19th century, there were toothache drops made out of the very illegal white powder, and as you would expect, they were quite the sensation. You see, folks back then weren't blessed with the modern dental care we have now. Toothaches were a real menace, and folks were constantly looking for relief. Along came those toothache drops. Yeah, they contained, you guessed it, good old white powder mixed with other ingredients to make it palatable. But you can't really blame them. At that time, the white powder was a newly discovered substance, and people hadn't yet realized just how dangerous it could be. These toothache drops were marketed as a quick and effective remedy for tooth pain. A few drops of this liquid on an aching tooth, and the pain was supposed to melt away like snow on a warm day, and people were lining up to get their hands on these drops. The relief was immediate, but little did they know the price they'd eventually pay. You see, using the white stuff in this way did indeed numb the pain, but it also had a host of harmful effects on the body. The drug is a potent stimulant that can mess with your heart rate, blood pressure, and even your brain. People started experiencing all sorts of health problems, from heart palpitations to nervousness and even addiction. But the thing about addiction is, once it gets a hold of you, it's like a devil you can't shake off. As time went on, medical professionals began to notice the alarming side effects of these white powder-laden toothache drops. Reports of addiction, health issues, and even deaths started piling up. It became clear that while the drops might offer temporary relief, they were causing more harm than good in the long run. So, how did they get taken off the counters, you ask? Well, it took a combination of growing medical understanding, public awareness, and regulation. As doctors and scientists began to study cocaine's effects more closely, they realized just how dangerous it was. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 was a significant turning point. This legislation aimed to ensure that drugs and food were accurately labeled and free from harmful additives. With increased awareness of the dangers of the tightening of regulations, these toothache drops eventually faded away from the market. The medical community, along with a more informed public, started demanding safer and more effective treatments for toothaches and other ailments. And that, my young friend, is the story of white powder toothache drops. A cautionary tale about the perils of turning to quick fixes without considering the long-term consequences. Stick around, there's plenty more where that came from. Kimball white pine and tar cough syrup. Back in the old days, folks had their share of coughs and colds just like we do now, but they didn't have the fancy medicines we have today. Oh no, they had something quite unique: Kimball white pine and tar cough syrup, a mixture of white pine and tar. You might be wondering why in tarnation they put tar in cough syrup of all things. Well, you see, tar was thought to have some powerful healing properties. It was believed to be a good expectorant, meaning it could help loosen up the gunk in your chest and make it easier to cough up. And white pine, well, that was considered a soothing ingredient for the throat. So some clever fool figured, why not mix them together and whip up a remedy for them pesky coughs? Now, it's true that tar doesn't have certain compounds that can help with respiratory issues, but let me tell you, things didn't quite turn out as expected. This cough syrup might have had a peculiar taste, a bit like pine forest mixed with road crew, but it was advertised as a real panacea. People were guzzling down this syrup thinking it would work wonders, but along with the tar and white pine, trouble started brewing. Turns out that tar wasn't all rainbows and sunshine. See, over time, folks began to experience some rather unpleasant side effects. You see, the tar in the syrup contained various impurities and compounds that weren't exactly meant for human consumption. People started complaining about upset stomachs, nausea, and even skin rashes. And that's not all. Some folks even reported some serious issues like breathing difficulties and heart irregularities. As word spread about these health problems, the people began to realize that maybe this cough syrup wasn't the magic potion they hoped for. Medicinal professionals started raising their eyebrows, and regulatory bodies began taking a closer look. It wasn't long before investigations revealed that this Kimball white pine and tar cough syrup was causing more harm than good. So how you feeling? Let's hope you're not getting sick of this video, because none of these medicines can help you. Give this video a like to prove it, and stay for the last one. We bet your granddaddy fell for its marketing schemes too. On to Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. Back in the 19th century, there was a product called Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, and it had quite a reputation. This here syrup was sold as a remedy for fussy babies, teething troubles, and all sorts of ailments that kept the little ones up at night. But how does a syrup meant for babies end up being a dangerous concoction? Well, the main ingredients were morphine and alcohol. Yep, you heard me right. Morphine, a powerful opiate, and alcohol, that fiery spirit folks like to indulge in. They believed these ingredients would calm the crankiest of babies and help them drift off into dreamland. You see, back then, folks weren't as savvy about the risks of certain substances as we are today. Morphine was considered a wonder drug, and alcohol was used for all sorts of remedies. The idea was that a spoonful of this syrup would hush the cries of a restless babe and give wary parents some much-needed rest. But oh my, did things take a turn. While it's true that morphine did indeed calm the nerves, it comes with a heavy price. Both morphine and alcohol are highly addictive substances, and using them in a syrup meant for babies was a recipe for disaster. Not only did the syrup create a dependence on these substances from an early age, but it also had a host of side effects. Babies who were regularly given this syrup often became lethargic and drowsy, sometimes to dangerous levels. And as they grew, they faced the risk of developing toleration and addiction, setting them up for a life plagued by substance dependency. Now, let me tell you how this tale of recklessness met its end. As time went on and medical knowledge advanced, folks began to realize the havoc that Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was wreaking on young lives. Reports of babies suffering ill effects, becoming addicted, started coming to light. Medical professionals, parents, and concerned citizens began to raise their voices against this dangerous potion. Regulations started to tighten, and laws were put into place to curb the sale of such harmful products. Slowly but surely, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup and similar concoctions were banished from pharmacies and the market. It was a hard lesson learned about the importance of understanding that we put into our bodies and the bodies of our little ones. Nebutol. Another dangerous remedy that was sold as medicine was Nebutol. Back in the mid-20th century, this here drug was hailed as a powerful solution for a range of troubles, but it ended up causing more harm than good. You see, Nebutol was a brand name for a drug called pentobarbital, a type of barbiturate. They said that it was a wonder drug that could cure all sorts of things: insomnia, anxiety, and even epileptic seizures. Well, folks thought it was a miracle in a bottle ready to bring relief from their suffering. Now, barbiturates like Nebutol do have sedative and hypnotic properties, so they can indeed make you feel calm and drowsy. But here's the thing, they also come with some mighty dangerous side effects. Folks started experiencing all sorts of issues: dizziness, confusion, and even worse, addiction. Nebutol was particularly tricky because it could build up in your system over time, and before you knew it, you were depending on it just to get through the day. And then there was the matter of overdose. You see, Nebutol had a depressant effect on the central nervous system, which meant it could slow down your heart rate and breathing to dangerous levels if taken in excess. Now, how did we finally get rid of this dangerous drug? Well, it took a combination of medical insight, public awareness, and regulatory action. As doctors and scientists studied the effects of barbiturates like Nembutal more closely, they started realizing just how risky they were. Regulatory agencies stepped in to tighten the reins on these medications as more knowledge came to light about the dangers of barbiturates. Restrictions were put in place to make them harder to obtain. Cigaris de Joy. Back then, folks thought smoking would cure what ailed them. They called them Cigaris de Joy. Oh, how times have changed. During that time, folks were searching high and low for cures to their ailments. Along came the Cigaris de Joy, claiming they could cure stuff like asthma, bronchitis, and even old coughs. Can you believe it? They thought that inhaling the smoke from these cigars could work wonders for your health. Now you might be thinking, why in the world they believe smoking could cure them? Well, back then they thought tobacco had medicinal properties and that it could soothe the lungs and ease respiratory problems. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? But that's what they believed, and they had these little cigarettes de joy to prove it. But let me tell you, these cigares weren't spreading joy at all. You see, tobacco smoke contains all sorts of harmful chemicals. And back then, folks didn't have the knowledge we have today about how smoking can wreak havoc on your health. Instead of getting better, folks who puffed on these cigars started getting sicker. Health problems began to rear their ugly heads: persistent coughs, lung infections, and even worse, addiction. Those who thought they were finding relief were actually digging themselves into a deeper hole of misery. But as with many tales of such misguided endeavors, enlightenment eventually came knocking. As medical research advanced and our understanding of tobacco's risks grew, folks began to see the truth. It wasn't long before these cigares de joy were exposed for what they were: a dangerous deception. And there you go. Which of these dangerous drugs do you think was the worst? Share your comments in the comment section below, and if you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.